3 years ago, I stood in my childhood bedroom, staring at a wedding invitation that should have had my name on it. Instead, there was a blank space where the maid of honor should be listed. My own brother had erased me from the most important day of his life, and I was about to discover that sometimes the people who truly see your worth aren't the ones who share your blood. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The morning everything changed like any other Tuesday in March. I was stationed at Fort Braxton, North Carolina, going through my usual pre-dawn routine when my phone buzzed with a text from my younger sister Hannah. "Check your email," was all it said, followed by 3 crying emojis that made my stomach drop. I'd been serving in the Army for 8 years at that point, working my way up through the ranks with a determination that had earned me respect from my commanding officers and the soldiers under my command. Lieutenant Colonel Rebecca Martinez, that's me, had just received word that I was being considered for promotion to full colonel, something I'd worked toward my entire military career. But as I opened that email from Hannah, all thoughts of promotions and career advancement vanished. The wedding invitation was beautiful, I'll give them that. Cream-colored cardstock with gold lettering, announcing the marriage of my brother David Thompson to his fiancée Sarah Chen. The ceremony was set for June 15th at the historic Riverside Manor in our hometown of Millbrook, Vermont. Everything looked perfect, except for one glaring omission that hit me like a physical blow. There was no mention of a maid of honor. I read through the invitation 3 times, thinking maybe I'd missed something. The groomsmen were all listed. David's college roommate Jake as best man, our cousin Michael, Sarah's brother Tommy, and 2 other guys I barely knew. But the bride's side? Just bridesmaids. No maid of honor listed anywhere. My hands were shaking as I called Hannah immediately. She picked up on the first ring, her voice thick with emotion. "Becca, I'm so sorry. I found out yesterday and I've been trying to figure out how to tell you." "Tell me what, exactly?" I asked, though I already knew the answer would devastate me. "Sarah asked Mom to be her matron of honor instead of you," she said. Hannah's voice trailed off. "She said what?" "She said she wanted someone who would actually be present for all the wedding planning and pre-wedding events. Someone who wasn't deployed or training or too busy with military obligations." The words stung because there was truth in them, but also because they felt like a betrayal of everything I'd sacrificed for my family and my country. I'd missed some family gatherings, yes. I'd been deployed during Hannah's graduation. I'd had to participate in Christmas dinner via video call more times than I could count. But I'd never missed the truly important moments when I could help it. "What did Mom say?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "She agreed to do it. She said it made sense since you're so far away and so busy with your career." There it was. My own mother had agreed to take my place as maid of honor at my brother's wedding. The brother I'd helped raise after Dad died when David was only 12. The brother I'd sent care packages to during his freshman year of college. The brother who used to call me his hero when he was little. I hung up with Hannah and sat in my quarters, staring at the invitation. The hurt was overwhelming, but underneath it was something else. A familiar feeling I'd experienced in combat zones and high-pressure situations. The feeling of being completely alone, of having to prove myself to people who should have already believed in me. Over the next few days, I threw myself into work with even more intensity than usual. I was leading a training exercise for new recruits, and I channeled all my frustration and pain into making sure these young soldiers understood what it meant to have each other's backs. Because apparently, that was something my own family had never learned. My commanding officer, General Patricia Hayes, noticed the change in my demeanor during our weekly briefing. General Hayes was a woman who'd fought her way through the ranks in an era when female officers faced even more obstacles than we do today. She had a way of seeing through pretense that made her both feared and respected. "Colonel Martinez," she said after we'd finished discussing the training schedules. "A word?" I stayed behind as the other officers filed out of the conference room. General Hayes poured herself a cup of coffee from the machine in the corner and gestured for me to sit. "You've been different this week. More intense, if that's possible." "What's going on?" I hesitated. Military culture doesn't exactly encourage emotional vulnerability, and I'd worked hard to build a reputation as someone who could handle anything. But something in General Hayes' expression told me she wasn't asking as my commanding officer. She was asking as one woman to another. Family issues, ma'am. My brother's getting married and I've been uninvited from the wedding party. General Hayes raised an eyebrow. Uninvited? That's an interesting choice of words. I told her the whole story, about the invitation, about my mother taking my place, about feeling like my military service had somehow disqualified me from being part of my own family's most important moments. General Hayes listened without interrupting, her expression growing more thoughtful with each detail. You know, she said when I finished, I've been in the military for 26 years. I've missed birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, and yes, weddings. But the people who truly matter, the ones who understand the sacrifice we make, they don't punish us for our service. They honor it. But they're my family, I said, hating how small my voice sounded. Family isn't just about blood, Martinez. It's about the people who stand by you when everything falls apart. The people who celebrate your victories and support you through your failures. The people who understand that serving your country is a calling, not just a job. She was right, of course, but it didn't make the rejection hurt any less. That evening, I called my brother directly. David answered on the third ring, his voice cautious when he heard it was me. Hey, Becca. I was wondering when you'd call. Were you? Because it seems like you were hoping I wouldn't call at all, considering I wasn't important enough to include in your wedding party. There was a long pause. It's not like that. Then what is it like, David? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've decided that my military service makes me less reliable than Mom as a maid of honor. Sarah just wanted someone who could be there for all the preparation stuff. You know how it is. You're always busy with training or deployments or whatever. We needed someone who could actually show up. The casualness of his dismissal was almost worse than the initial rejection. This was my little brother, the kid I'd taught to ride a bike and helped with homework when Mom was working double shifts to keep us afloat after Dad's death. The same kid who'd cried when I left for basic training and made me promise to come home safe. I've been home for 6 months, David. I specifically requested leave time around your wedding. I've been planning to take 2 weeks off to help with whatever you needed. But what about next time? What if you get deployed again? What if there's another training exercise or mission or whatever? Sarah didn't want to have to worry about whether her maid of honor would actually be there. The words hit me like a slap. So you're punishing me for my career choice? I'm not punishing you. I'm just being practical. Mom's always going to be here. You're always going to be somewhere else. After we hung up, I sat in my quarters feeling more alone than I had during any deployment. Being far from home while serving your country is one thing. You're doing it for a purpose, surrounded by people who understand the mission. But being rejected by your own family because of that service, that was a different kind of isolation entirely. I thought about all the times I'd put my family first despite my military obligations. The emergency leave I'd taken when Mom had her surgery, the video calls I'd made from overseas just to help David with his college applications, the care packages I'd sent, the letters I'd written, the way I'd tried to stay connected despite the distance and the demands of military life. None of it seemed to matter now. The next morning brought news that should have been the highlight of my career. General Hayes called me into her office with a smile I hadn't seen before. Congratulations, Colonel Martinez. Your promotion to full colonel has been approved. The ceremony is scheduled for next month. It was everything I'd worked for, the culmination of years of dedication and sacrifice. But as I sat there receiving the news, all I could think about was how my own family wouldn't be there to celebrate with me. They'd be too busy planning a wedding where I wasn't welcome in the role I'd always assumed would be mine. Thank you, ma'am, I'm honored. You should be. This promotion puts you in line for some very interesting opportunities. There's a position opening up at the Pentagon that would be perfect for someone with your experience and leadership qualities. The Pentagon. It was a dream assignment, the kind of opportunity that came along once in a career. But it also meant I'd be even further from my family, even more unavailable for the day-to-day moments they seemed to value more than my military achievements. Over the following weeks, I found myself questioning everything. Was I wrong to have prioritized my military career over family gatherings? Had I been selfish in pursuing my dreams of serving my country? The doubt was corrosive, eating away at the confidence I'd built over years of successful leadership and service. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. But then something happened that changed my perspective entirely. I was leading a training exercise when one of my soldiers, Private Jessica Walsh, approached me after the session. "Colonel Martinez, can I ask you something?" "Of course, Private Walsh." "My family's been giving me grief about re-enlisting. They say I'm wasting my time, that I should come home and get married and have kids like my sisters did. But watching you lead, seeing what you've accomplished, it makes me want to stay and fight for what I believe in. You're proof that women can succeed in the military without sacrificing who we are." Her words hit me harder than any family rejection could. Here was a young woman who saw my career not as a barrier to family relationships, but as inspiration to pursue her own dreams. She understood what my own family seemed to have forgotten, that military service is about something bigger than personal convenience. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to let my family's rejection define me or diminish my sense of self-worth. I would attend David's wedding, not as the maid of honor, but as a proud military officer who had dedicated her life to serving her country. I called Hannah to let her know I'd be coming to the wedding. "Really? Even after everything that happened?" "He's still my brother, Hannah. And I'm still proud of my service, regardless of whether they appreciate it or not." "I think you're being incredibly gracious, Becca. A lot of people wouldn't be so forgiving." "I'm not doing it for forgiveness. I'm doing it because I know who I am and what I've accomplished. Their inability to see that doesn't diminish its value." As I hung up the phone, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt was still there, but it was overshadowed by a quiet determination. I would go to this wedding with my head held high, wearing my dress blues with pride, and I would show my family exactly what they had chosen to overlook. I had no idea that someone else at that wedding would see me more clearly than my own family ever had, or that a simple gesture of respect would restore my faith in human decency. But that revelation was still weeks away, and first I had to prepare for what would be one of the most challenging days of my life. The weeks leading up to David's wedding passed in a blur of military duties and careful emotional preparation. I threw myself into my work with renewed focus, completing my colonel promotion ceremony with General Hayes presiding. The moment she pinned the eagle insignia to my uniform, I felt a surge of pride that my family's rejection couldn't diminish. 23 fellow officers attended the ceremony, applauding as I took the oath that would elevate me to one of the highest ranks a career military officer could achieve. But even as I celebrated this milestone, I couldn't shake the irony that none of my family members had asked about the promotion. When I'd mentioned it to my mother during our weekly phone call, she'd responded with a distracted, "That's nice, honey," before launching into details about wedding cake tastings and flower arrangements. 3 days before the wedding, I received an unexpected call from Sarah, my soon-to-be sister-in-law. We'd never been particularly close. She was polite but distant, the kind of person who smiled at family gatherings but never really engaged in meaningful conversation. "Rebecca, I wanted to talk to you about something," she said, her voice carrying an unusual nervousness. "Sure, what's on your mind?" "I know you might be upset about the maid of honor situation, and I wanted to explain my reasoning." I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "Sarah, it's your wedding. You get to choose who stands beside you." "It's not that I don't value you," she continued, seemingly unable to stop herself from explaining. "It's just that military people are so unpredictable. What if there had been some kind of emergency or deployment? What if you'd had to leave right before the ceremony? I needed someone I could count on to be there no matter what." The assumption stung because it revealed how little she understood about military life. "I requested leave months ago, Sarah. I've been stateside for 6 months, with no deployment scheduled. I would have been more reliable than anyone else in your wedding party." "But you can't guarantee that, can you? Something could have come up. Some mission or training exercise or whatever it is you do." Her casual dismissal of my career as, "whatever it is you do," crystallized something I'd been feeling but couldn't articulate. This wasn't just about wedding planning logistics. It was about a fundamental lack of respect for my chosen profession and the sacrifices I'd made to serve my country. "Sarah, I've been in the military for 8 years. I've learned to plan around important commitments. I've never missed a family emergency or significant event when I could possibly be there. Well, it's done now anyway. Your mother is excited to be involved, and she's been wonderful with all the planning. After we hung up, I sat in my quarters reflecting on how isolated I'd become from my own family. They saw my military service as an inconvenience, a barrier to normal family relationships rather than a calling that required their support and understanding. 2 days before the wedding, I drove from North Carolina to Vermont, taking leave I'd carefully arranged months in advance. The 6-hour drive gave me time to process my emotions and prepare for what would undoubtedly be a difficult weekend. I decided to stay in a hotel rather than with my family, a choice that felt both protective and symbolic. The rehearsal dinner was held at Antonio's, a small Italian restaurant that had been a family favorite since my childhood. I arrived wearing civilian clothes, a simple blue dress that I'd chosen specifically to avoid drawing attention to myself. The goal was to blend in, to be present without creating drama or discomfort for anyone else. My mother hugged me when I arrived, but there was something perfunctory about the gesture. "Oh good, you made it. I wasn't sure if you'd be able to get away." "I told you I'd be here, Mom. I requested leave specifically for this weekend." "Well, you know how it is with military schedules. Things come up." The same assumption that had driven Sarah's decision was apparently shared by my entire family. They'd all convinced themselves that my military career made me fundamentally unreliable, despite years of evidence to the contrary. David approached me near the bar, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Becca, I'm glad you came." "Of course I came. You're my brother." "I know things have been weird with the whole maid of honor situation. I hope you understand it wasn't personal." But it was personal. It was deeply, profoundly personal. It was about their perception of my priorities, their understanding of my character, and their respect for the career I'd built through dedication and sacrifice. "I understand perfectly, David. You chose someone you felt would be more present and available. I hope Mom does a wonderful job." He seemed to sense the hurt beneath my polite words but didn't know how to address it. "You know I'm proud of you, right? Of your career and everything you've accomplished." "Are you? Because it seems like my career is exactly what disqualified me from being part of your wedding party." He didn't have an answer for that, and I didn't push for one. The damage was done, and rehashing it at his rehearsal dinner wouldn't benefit anyone. The dinner proceeded with speeches from the groomsmen and toasts from various family members. I sat quietly, observing the dynamics I'd somehow become excluded from. My mother was radiant in her role as matron of honor, discussing wedding day logistics with Sarah and the other bridesmaids. It was clear she was enjoying the responsibility and the central role in the celebration. The one person who seemed to notice my isolation was Jake Morrison, David's best man. I'd met him a few times over the years when he'd visited our family, but we'd never had substantial conversations. He was a financial analyst from Boston, someone who'd been David's roommate at college and had remained his closest friend. During a lull in the conversation, Jake approached my table. "Mind if I sit?" "Of course not." I have to say I was surprised when David told me about the maid of honor situation. I always assumed you'd be standing up there with him. His directness caught me off guard. "It's Sarah's choice to make." "Sure, but it's also a choice that says something about priorities. I've heard David talk about you over the years. The way he used to describe you, you were practically a second parent to him after your father died." I looked across the room at my brother, who was laughing at something one of the groomsmen had said. People change, priorities shift. Maybe. Or maybe some people just don't know how to appreciate what they have until it's gone. Jake's observation was surprisingly insightful, and it planted a seed of thought that would grow throughout the weekend. Here was someone who barely knew me, recognizing something my own family had overlooked. The conversation moved to lighter topics, but I found myself genuinely enjoying Jake's company. He was intelligent and thoughtful, asking about my military career with genuine curiosity rather than the polite disinterest I'd grown accustomed to from my family. "What's it like being a colonel?" he asked. "That's a pretty significant rank, isn't it?" "It is. I'm responsible for about 3,000 soldiers and their families. It's challenging but incredibly rewarding." "That's amazing. I can't imagine the level of responsibility and leadership that requires." For the first time all evening, I felt seen and appreciated for who I was and what I'd accomplished. Jake's questions were thoughtful and his interest seemed genuine. He asked about my deployment experiences, my leadership philosophy, and my thoughts on military strategy with the kind of engagement I rarely experienced from civilians. As the evening wound down, Jake made a comment that would stay with me through the next day's events. I've been thinking about what you said earlier about people not appreciating what they have. Tomorrow, when I give my best man speech, I'm going to make sure everyone understands exactly what kind of person David has in his family. I wasn't sure what he meant by that, but there was something in his tone that suggested he'd been formulating a plan throughout the evening. The next morning brought the wedding day itself. I'd chosen to wear my dress blue uniform, a decision I'd debated for weeks. Part of me wanted to blend in with civilian clothes, but ultimately I decided that my military service was part of who I was, and I wouldn't hide it to make others more comfortable. Hell, the dress blues are striking. A dark blue jacket with gold buttons, matching trousers, and various ribbons and insignia that tell the story of a military career. My colonel's eagle insignia was prominently displayed, along with ribbons representing my deployments, commendations, and years of service. When I arrived at Riverside Manor, the venue looked like something from a fairy tale. The historic building was draped in white fabric and surrounded by gardens in full bloom. Sarah had chosen well. It was elegant without being ostentatious, romantic without being overwhelming. I found my seat in the third row, behind immediate family members and close friends. The placement felt deliberate, close enough to show I was family, but far enough back to indicate my diminished role in the proceedings. My mother looked beautiful in her champagne-colored dress, her matron of honor bouquet perfectly coordinated with the wedding colors. She was clearly enjoying her prominent role, and I had to admit she looked radiant. But seeing her there, in the position I'd always imagined would be mine, was more painful than I'd anticipated. The ceremony itself was beautiful. David looked handsome in his black tuxedo, his nervousness evident, but endearing. Sarah was stunning in her grandmother's vintage lace dress, her joy radiating as she walked down the aisle. Despite everything that had happened, I found myself genuinely happy for them at that moment. But as the ceremony progressed, I became increasingly aware of how isolated I felt. Family members around me were whispering to each other, sharing private jokes and observations. I sat alone in my dress blues, feeling like an outsider at my own brother's wedding. The reception began immediately after the ceremony in the Manor's ballroom. The room was elegantly decorated with white flowers and soft lighting, creating an atmosphere of celebration and joy. I found my assigned table, table 6, with some family friends I barely knew and a few of Sarah's coworkers. The conversation at my table was polite but superficial. People made small talk about the weather, the venue, and the food, but no one asked about my military service or seemed particularly interested in getting to know me. I felt like I was watching the celebration from behind glass, present but not truly part of it. The formal reception program began with the wedding party introductions. Each member of the bridal party was announced with a brief description of their relationship to the couple. When my mother was introduced as matron of honor, the applause was warm and enthusiastic. She beamed as she waved to the crowd, clearly enjoying her moment in the spotlight. Then came the best man's speech. Jake stood at the microphone, looking confident and prepared. He began with the typical humor and anecdotes about David's college years, drawing laughter from the assembled guests. But then his tone shifted, becoming more serious and thoughtful. "I want to talk about something that's been on my mind as I've gotten to know David's family better over the years," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom. "David often talks about the people who shaped him into the man he is today. His mother, certainly, who worked tirelessly to provide for her children after losing her husband. His sisters, who supported him through various challenges and celebrations." Jake paused, his eyes scanning the room until they found me. "But there's someone else who played a crucial role in David's development. Someone whose influence on his character and values cannot be overstated." I felt my heart begin to race as I realized where his speech was heading. When David was 12 years old, his father died unexpectedly. It was a devastating loss for the entire family, But it was David's older sister who stepped up to help fill that void. She was only 19 herself, but she took on responsibilities that went far beyond what should be expected of a teenager. The room had grown quiet, everyone focused on Jake's words. I could see David looking confused, perhaps wondering why his best man was talking about family dynamics rather than funny college stories. This young woman helped David with his homework, taught him to drive, and guided him through the difficult transition from adolescence to adulthood. She was there for every important moment, every milestone, every challenge he faced. Jake's voice grew stronger, more passionate. And then, when David was safe and settled and on his own path, this remarkable woman made the decision to dedicate her life to serving her country. She joined the United States Army, where she has spent the last 8 years protecting the freedoms we all enjoy. I could feel people turning to look at me, and I fought the urge to sink into my chair. This was not the kind of attention I'd wanted or expected. Today, that woman sits among us not as a member of the wedding party, but as a guest. And while I respect the decisions that led to that arrangement, I cannot let this moment pass without recognizing her service and sacrifice. Jake's voice rose with conviction. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet someone who has dedicated her life to serving others, both in her family and in her country. Someone who has earned the rank of colonel in the United States Army through dedication, courage, and unwavering commitment to excellence. The entire ballroom had turned to look at me now, and I felt my face burning with embarrassment and emotion. Jake raised his champagne glass high in the air. Would everyone please join me in honoring Colonel Rebecca Martinez, a true American hero who has served her country with distinction and honor. What happened next was something I will never forget for as long as I live. Jake, still holding his champagne glass, brought his other hand up in a crisp, military salute. His voice rang out clearly across the silent ballroom. Welcome, Field Marshal. The title was wrong. Field Marshal is a rank that doesn't exist in the U.S. Army, but the gesture was so unexpected, so sincere, and so full of respect that it took my breath away. Here was a civilian who understood the honor and sacrifice of military service better than my own family had. The silence that followed Jake's salute seemed to stretch for an eternity. 200 wedding guests sat frozen, champagne glasses suspended midair, all eyes focused on me in my dress blues. The weight of their collective attention was overwhelming, but something in Jake's unwavering gaze gave me the strength to respond. I stood slowly, my military training taking over despite the emotional chaos swirling inside me. My posture straightened automatically, shoulders back, chin up, every inch the officer I'd worked so hard to become. Without thinking, I brought my hand up in a crisp return salute, acknowledging Jake's gesture with the precision and dignity that had been drilled into me through years of service. Thank you, I said, my voice carrying across the silent ballroom with the authority I'd developed commanding thousands of soldiers. It's an honor to serve. The response was immediate and thunderous. The entire ballroom erupted in applause, people rising from their seats in a standing ovation that seemed to go on forever. But this wasn't polite wedding reception clapping. This was genuine, heartfelt appreciation from people who had just been reminded that freedom isn't free, and that someone in their midst had dedicated her life to protecting theirs. Through the crowd, I could see my family's varied reactions. My mother looked stunned, her mouth slightly open as she watched the scene unfold. Hannah was crying openly, her hands pressed to her mouth in what looked like a mixture of pride and regret. David appeared confused and somewhat uncomfortable, perhaps realizing for the first time that his decision to exclude me from the wedding party had not gone unnoticed by others. But it was Sarah's reaction that surprised me most. My new sister-in-law was also applauding, tears streaming down her face as she looked at me with what appeared to be genuine respect, and perhaps a touch of remorse. For the first time since I'd met her, I saw past the polite distance to something more authentic underneath. As the applause finally began to die down, Jake continued his speech, but the tone had shifted completely. What had started as a traditional best man's toast had become something unprecedented, a public acknowledgement of military service and sacrifice that transformed the entire atmosphere of the reception. I want to share something that David told me about his sister, Jake continued, his voice still strong with emotion. When he was 16, and struggling with his college applications. Rebecca was deployed in Afghanistan. But every week, despite the time difference and the dangers she faced, she would find a way to call him and help him work through his essays. She helped him choose his major, guided him through the application process, and celebrated with him when he got accepted to college, all while serving our country in a combat zone. The room was completely silent now, every person hanging on Jake's words. I could see guests at various tables wiping their eyes, and I realized that Jake's speech was having an impact far beyond what he'd probably intended. That's the kind of person Rebecca Martinez is, Jake continued. Someone who puts others before herself, who serves with distinction, both in her family and in her country. Someone who deserves our recognition, our gratitude, and our respect. He raised his glass again, this time in a traditional toast. To Colonel Rebecca Martinez, may we all strive to serve others with such dedication and honor. The second round of applause was even more enthusiastic than the first, and I found myself genuinely moved by the unexpected recognition. As I sat down, people from neighboring tables began approaching me, shaking my hand, thanking me for my service, and asking about my military career with genuine interest. An elderly gentleman from Table 4 introduced himself as Robert Chen, Sarah's grandfather and a Korean War veteran. His eyes were bright with unshed tears as he gripped my hand firmly. "Colonel, I haven't seen a finer display of military bearing in decades. Your dress blues are impeccable, and your composure under pressure is exactly what I'd expect from an officer of your caliber." "Thank you, sir. It's an honor to meet a fellow veteran." "The honor is mine, Colonel. I served as a sergeant in the 2nd Infantry Division. Saw action at Heartbreak Ridge and Pork Chop Hill. But I never made it past enlisted ranks. To see a young woman achieve the rank of colonel, it gives me hope for the future of our military." Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of several other guests, all wanting to express their appreciation for my service. A young mother introduced her teenage son, explaining that he was considering joining the army after graduation. A middle-aged businessman shared that his brother had served in Iraq and that he understood the sacrifices military families made. For the first time all weekend, I felt truly seen and appreciated. These strangers were showing me the kind of respect and recognition that my own family had failed to provide. It was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. As the evening progressed, I found myself in conversation after conversation with wedding guests who were curious about military life, grateful for my service, or simply interested in getting to know me better. The isolation I'd felt earlier had been completely replaced by a sense of connection and belonging. During the dancing portion of the reception, Jake appeared at my table again, this time without the formal demeanor of his speech. He looked slightly nervous as he approached. "I hope I didn't overstep any boundaries with that speech," he said, sitting down beside me. "I've been thinking about what you said last night, about people not appreciating what they have, and I couldn't let tonight pass without saying something." "You didn't overstep at all. That was unexpected, but deeply appreciated." "I meant every word of it. I've been watching your family's dynamics all weekend, and I have to say, I think they're missing something important about who you are and what you've accomplished." His observation was astute and painfully accurate. Family relationships can be complicated, especially when career choices create distance. "Distance isn't the same as absence," Jake said firmly. "From what I've observed, you've been present for every important moment when it mattered. The problem isn't your availability, it's their perception of your priorities." Before I could respond, my mother appeared at our table, looking more flustered than I'd seen her all weekend. "Rebecca, honey, can we talk privately for a moment?" I excused myself from Jake and followed my mother to a quiet corner of the ballroom, near the French doors that opened onto the manor's gardens. "What you did out there, standing up and saluting like that, it was very dramatic," she began, her voice carrying a note of criticism that I'd grown accustomed to over the years. "I was responding to a gesture of respect, Mom. It would have been rude not to acknowledge it." "Well, it certainly drew a lot of attention to yourself. People are talking about it more than they're talking about the wedding." Her complaint revealed everything I needed to know about her priorities. Even now, after witnessing the genuine appreciation and respect shown by complete strangers, she was more concerned about protocol and appearances than about understanding why Jake's gesture had been so meaningful. Mom, did you hear what Jake said in his speech? About the sacrifices I've made, the role I played in raising David, the service I've given to our country? Of course I heard it. But this is David's day, not yours. All that attention should be focused on him and Sarah, not on your military career. The words stung because they confirmed what I'd suspected all along, that my family viewed my military service as something that competed with their needs, rather than something that honored our country and protected their freedoms. I didn't ask for that attention, Mom. I didn't plan for Jake to give that speech or make that gesture. I was perfectly content to sit quietly and celebrate David's wedding. Well, next time maybe you should consider wearing regular clothes instead of that uniform. It's very conspicuous. The criticism of my dress blues was the final straw. These weren't just clothes. They were a symbol of everything I'd worked for, everything I'd sacrificed, everything I'd achieved through dedication and service. These dress blues represent 8 years of service to our country, Mom. They represent deployments where I missed birthdays and holidays to protect the freedoms you enjoy. They represent the leadership of thousands of soldiers who depend on me to make decisions that could mean the difference between life and death. I'm proud to wear them, and I'm not going to hide who I am to make other people more comfortable. My mother's expression softened slightly, perhaps recognizing that she'd crossed a line. I'm proud of you too, honey. I just wish... You wish what? I wish you could have found a way to serve your country that didn't require you to be so far away from family. It was an honest admission, and I appreciated the vulnerability it revealed. But it also showed how little she understood about military service, and the calling that had driven me to choose this path. Mom, military service isn't a job you can do from your hometown. It requires sacrifice, dedication, and yes, sometimes distance from family. But it's also honorable work that makes a difference in the world. I wish you could see it that way. Before she could respond, David appeared beside us, looking uncomfortable but determined. Becca, I need to talk to you about something. My mother excused herself, leaving David and me alone on the garden terrace. The evening air was cool and sweet, with the scent of blooming flowers, a peaceful contrast to the emotional intensity of the evening. I owe you an apology, David began, his voice heavy with emotion. Jake's speech made me realize some things I should have understood a long time ago. David, you don't need to. Yes, I do. I've been selfish and short-sighted, and I've let Sarah's concerns about reliability override my own knowledge of who you are and what you've done for our family. He paused, running his hand through his hair in a gesture I remembered from his childhood when he was struggling with difficult emotions. I've been thinking about what Jake said about you helping me with my college applications while you were deployed. I remember those calls, Becca. I remember how you would stay up until all hours, despite the time difference, to help me work through my essays. I remember how you celebrated with me when I got accepted to college, even though you were thousands of miles away in a war zone. Tears were beginning to form in his eyes, and I felt my own emotional walls starting to crumble. I remember how you came home on emergency leave when I broke my leg senior year, even though you were in the middle of important training. I remember how you helped me move into my college dorm, how you gave me advice about choosing a major, how you've been there for every important moment in my life when it actually mattered. David, I let Sarah convince me that your military service made you unreliable, but the truth is, you've been more reliable than anyone else in our family. You've sacrificed your own comfort and convenience to be there for us, and I repaid that by excluding you from the most important day of my life. The pain in his voice was genuine, and I could see that Jake's speech had forced him to confront truths he'd been avoiding. I can't change what I did, Becca. I can't go back and make you my best man, or convince Sarah to choose you as maid of honor. But I can tell you that I'm sorry, and I can promise you that I'll never make the mistake of undervaluing your commitment to our family again. For the first time all weekend, I felt like I was talking to my real brother, the boy I'd helped raise, the young man I'd guided through college, the person who had once called me his hero. I forgive you, David. I understand the pressure you were under, and I know Sarah's concerns weren't entirely unreasonable. Military life does require sacrifices, and it's not always easy for families to understand those demands. But that's exactly the point, David said firmly. You're the one making the sacrifices, not us. You're the one who's given up normal holidays and family gatherings to serve our country. The least we could do is support you and appreciate what you've chosen to do with your life." We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, looking out at the gardens where other wedding guests were mingling and enjoying the evening air. "Jake's a good friend," I said finally. He saw something that needed to be said and had the courage to say it. "He's more than a good friend. He's someone who understood the truth about our family dynamics better than we did ourselves. I'm grateful he spoke up, even if it was uncomfortable for some people." "Including Mom?" David sighed. "Mom's still processing everything. She's proud of you, but she's also scared. She's afraid that your military career will always come first, that will always be secondary to your service obligations." "That's not true, David. My military career is important to me, but family is important too. I've tried to balance both, but it's not always easy. I know that now. And I want you to know that going forward, I'm going to make sure our family does better. I'm going to make sure we appreciate your service and support your career instead of seeing it as competition for your attention." As we talked, I became aware of music drifting from the ballroom, slow, romantic songs that signaled the evening was winding down. Through the French doors, I could see couples dancing, including Jake, who was partnered with one of Sarah's bridesmaids. "I should probably head back inside," I said. "I want to say goodbye to Sarah and congratulate you both properly." "Actually, there's something else I want to ask you," David said, his voice carrying a note of nervousness. "I know this is probably too little too late, but would you be willing to give a toast? Not a formal speech or anything, just something from the heart?" The request surprised me. After being excluded from the wedding party, being asked to give a toast felt like a small gesture of inclusion, an acknowledgement that I did belong at this celebration after all. "Are you sure? I don't want to create any more drama or take attention away from you and Sarah." "I'm sure, and so is Sarah. She asked me to ask you, actually. She said she realized tonight that she made a mistake, and she wants to make it right somehow." The fact that Sarah had initiated this gesture meant more to me than David probably realized. It suggested that Jake's speech had affected her as much as it had affected everyone else. "I'd be honored to give a toast," I said, "but I want to keep it brief and focused on you and Sarah, not on tonight's earlier events." "Perfect. Thank you, Becca, for everything." As we walked back into the ballroom together, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. The hurt and rejection of the past few months hadn't disappeared entirely, but they had been replaced by something more hopeful, the possibility of rebuilding relationships that had been damaged by misunderstanding and miscommunication. Jake approached us as we re-entered the ballroom, his expression questioning. "Is everything okay out there?" "Better than okay," David replied. "We've worked some things out, and Rebecca's agreed to give a toast." Jake's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "That's wonderful. I think there are a lot of people here who would love to hear from you." As the evening continued, I found myself surrounded by warmth and connection in a way I hadn't experienced with my family in years. The gesture of respect that Jake had shown me had opened doors to conversations and relationships that might never have developed otherwise. But more importantly, it had forced my family to confront their own assumptions and biases about military service and the sacrifices required to serve one's country. The healing process would take time, but tonight had been a crucial first step toward rebuilding the relationships that mattered most to me. 20 minutes later, I found myself standing at the microphone where Jake had delivered his transformative speech earlier in the evening. The ballroom had quieted as word spread that David's sister, the colonel who had been honored so unexpectedly, was about to speak. I looked out at the faces before me, some familiar, some new, all focused on me with an attention that felt both humbling and empowering. "Good evening, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Rebecca Martinez, David's older sister and a colonel in the United States Army." I paused, letting my eyes find David and Sarah at the head table. "I want to start by saying how beautiful this wedding has been, and how happy I am to see my brother marry such a wonderful woman." Sarah smiled at me through tears that had been building since Jake's speech. There was something different in her expression now, a vulnerability and openness that hadn't been there before. When David was 12 years old, he asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up. I told him I wanted to serve my country and protect people who couldn't protect themselves. He said that sounded scary and dangerous, and he was right. But he also said it sounded important, and he was right about that too. The room was completely silent, everyone hanging on my words. I could see my mother in the third row, her expression thoughtful and perhaps regretful. Military service has given me incredible opportunities. The chance to lead, to serve, to make a difference in the world. But it also required sacrifices, and I want to acknowledge that some of those sacrifices have affected my family. I've missed Christmas mornings, birthday parties, and family gatherings. I've been thousands of miles away when you needed me close. I took a breath, choosing my next words carefully. But I also want you to know that every deployment, every training exercise, every late night in the office has been motivated by the same thing that drove me to join the military in the first place: the desire to protect the people I love and the freedoms we all cherish. Jake was nodding approvingly from his seat at the head table, and I caught his eye briefly, grateful for the courage he'd shown earlier. David, you've grown into an incredible man. You're compassionate, intelligent, and dedicated to the things that matter most. The fact that you found someone as wonderful as Sarah tells me everything I need to know about your character and your values. I turned to address Sarah directly. Sarah, welcome to our family. I know we got off to a complicated start, but I hope you'll give me the chance to show you that military service doesn't make someone less committed to family. It just makes the time we spend together more precious. Sarah was crying openly now, and she nodded emphatically, conveying an acceptance and understanding that transcended words. I want to tell you all something that happened 6 months ago, when I was preparing for my promotion to colonel. I was reviewing my personnel file, looking at all the commendations and performance evaluations I'd received over the years. But the document that meant the most to me wasn't anything official. It was a letter David had written to my commanding officer 3 years ago. David looked surprised, clearly not expecting me to bring up something so personal. He wrote to tell General Hayes about the kind of person I was, about the sacrifices I'd made for our family, and about how proud he was of my service. He said that if the Army was looking for an example of someone who embodied honor, courage, and commitment, they should look no further than his sister. I could see David wiping his eyes, and I felt my own voice thickening with emotion. That letter became part of my permanent record, and it played a role in my promotion. But more importantly, it reminded me that even when we're separated by distance or circumstances, the bonds between family members remain strong. David, you've been supporting my military career in ways I didn't even know about, and I'm grateful for that. The applause that followed was warm and heartfelt, but I held up my hand to indicate I had more to say. Tonight, Jake Morrison showed me something I'd forgotten, that respect and recognition can come from unexpected places, and that sometimes strangers understand your value better than the people closest to you. Jake, your speech and that salute meant more to me than you'll ever know. Thank you for seeing me, for honoring my service, and for having the courage to speak up when it mattered. Jake raised his champagne glass slightly, acknowledging my thanks with a smile that conveyed both pride and affection. To all the veterans in this room, and I know there are several of you here tonight, thank you for your service. To the families of military personnel, thank you for your sacrifice and support. And to everyone else, thank you for the freedoms you allow us to protect. I raised my champagne glass, looking around the room at faces that had become more than just wedding guests. They had become witnesses to a moment of healing and understanding. Now let's toast to David and Sarah Thompson. May your marriage be filled with love, laughter, and the kind of unwavering support that helps people become the best versions of themselves. Cheers! The response was thunderous, with people rising from their seats once again in applause that felt like a celebration of much more than just a wedding. As I made my way back to my table, I was stopped by guest after guest wanting to shake my hand, thank me for my service, or simply express their appreciation for my words. Robert Chen, Sarah's grandfather, intercepted me near the dance floor. Colonel, that was the finest toast I've heard in my 78 years. You've got the heart of a soldier and the soul of a poet. Thank you, Mr. Chen. That means a great deal coming from a fellow veteran. I served with men and women who would have been honored to serve under your command. Your family is lucky to have you. As the evening wound down, I found myself in conversation with Sarah's parents, who had approached me with genuine warmth and curiosity about my military career. Her father, Dr. James Chen, was a pediatric surgeon who understood something about service and sacrifice. Rebecca, I owe you an apology, he said. I supported Sarah's decision about the maid of honor situation because I thought it was practical. But after tonight, I realized we were thinking about logistics when we should have been thinking about relationships and respect. Dr. Chen, you don't need to apologize. You were supporting your daughter's wishes, which is exactly what a good father should do. Perhaps, but I also should have recognized that military service is a calling, not just a career. My father served in World War II, and I remember how proud our family was of his service. I should have extended that same respect to you. Sarah's mother, Linda, nodded in agreement. We'd be honored to have you visit us in California sometime. I'd love to learn more about your military career and get to know you better. Their acceptance and invitation felt like another door opening, another relationship that might flourish now that understanding had replaced assumption. As the reception began to wind down, I found myself alone with Jake on the terrace where David and I had reconciled earlier. The evening air was cooler now, and most of the guests had either left or moved inside to the bar area. I still can't believe you did that, I said, leaning against the stone railing. The salute, the speech, the whole thing, it was incredibly brave. Jake shrugged, but I could see he was pleased with how the evening had unfolded. It wasn't brave, it was necessary. Sometimes people need to be reminded of what really matters. You changed everything tonight, not just for me, but for my whole family. I don't know how to thank you for that. You don't need to thank me, I just told the truth about what I observed. The real change came from your family's willingness to listen and reconsider their assumptions. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the last few guests mingle in the gardens below. Can I ask you something? I said finally. Of course. Why did you call me Field Marshal? That's not actually a rank in the U.S. Army. Jake laughed, a sound that was both sheepish and endearing. I know it's not a real rank, but at that moment, Colonel didn't seem like enough. You needed something that conveyed the level of respect and honor you deserve. So I went with the highest military title I could think of. His explanation was both touching and amusing, and I found myself genuinely laughing for the first time all weekend. Well, it certainly got people's attention. That was the point. Sometimes you have to break protocol to make people pay attention to what really matters. As we talked, I realized that Jake's gesture had been about more than just military recognition. It had been about seeing someone as they truly were, not as others assumed them to be. In a world where people often make judgments based on limited information, Jake had taken the time to look deeper and respond to what he found there. I have to ask, I said, what made you notice all this? What made you care enough to speak up? Jake was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer carefully. I've been watching your family dynamics all weekend, and I kept seeing this disconnect between who you actually are and how you were being treated. You're clearly intelligent, accomplished, and dedicated to serving others. But it seemed like the people who should appreciate those qualities most were the ones who appreciated them least. He paused, looking out at the gardens where a few couples were still enjoying the evening air. I guess I've always believed that extraordinary people deserve extraordinary recognition. Your military service, your achievements, your dedication to your family, none of that should be taken for granted or dismissed as inconvenient. His words touched something deep inside me, a part of my heart that had been aching for exactly this kind of understanding and appreciation. Thank you, I said simply, for seeing me, for speaking up, and for giving me back something I didn't even realize I'd lost. What's that? The belief that my service matters, that my sacrifices have meaning, and that I deserve the same kind of respect and recognition that I give to others. As the evening came to a close, I said my goodbyes to the various guests who had made the night so meaningful. My conversation with my mother was brief but promising. She hugged me tightly and whispered that she was proud of me, that she was sorry for not understanding sooner, and that she hoped we could talk more in the coming weeks. Hannah drove me back to my hotel, and we spent the ride discussing everything that had happened. She was both amazed and grateful that Jake had spoken up, and she made me promise to stay in better touch with the family going forward. Tonight changed something, she said as we pulled into the hotel parking lot. I think we all realize that we've been taking you for granted, assuming you'd always be there when we needed you, but never really considering what you needed from us. I just needed to feel valued and respected for who I am and what I've chosen to do with my life. Well, after tonight, I don't think you'll ever have to doubt that again. 3 months later, I received a package at my new assignment in Washington, D.C. The Pentagon position had materialized exactly as General Hayes had predicted, and I was now working on strategic planning at the highest levels of military leadership. The package was from Jake, and it contained a framed photograph from David's wedding, a picture of me in my dress blues, standing and saluting in response to his gesture. But it also contained something else. A handwritten note explaining that he'd had the photograph professionally printed and framed, and that he'd sent copies to David, Sarah, and my mother. "I wanted to make sure your family had a reminder of this moment," his note read. "Sometimes people need visual reminders of the truth they've discovered about someone they love. I hope this helps them remember not just what happened that night, but why it mattered." 6 months after the wedding, Sarah called me to ask if I would be the godmother to the baby she and David were expecting. The request was both surprising and deeply meaningful, a sign that the relationships damaged by misunderstanding were not only healing but growing stronger. "I want our child to have someone like you as a role model," she said, "someone who shows them that service to others is one of the highest callings a person can have." A year later, I was promoted to Brigadier General, the first woman in my family to achieve general officer rank. The promotion ceremony was held at the Pentagon, and my entire family attended: my mother, David, Sarah, Hannah, and even Jake, who had become a close family friend in the months following the wedding. But the moment that meant the most to me wasn't the pinning of the new rank or the formal recognition of my achievements. It was when David approached me after the ceremony, saluted me with perfect military precision, and said, "I'm proud to call you my sister, General Martinez." At that moment, I realized that Jake's gesture at the wedding had accomplished something I'd never expected. It had taught my family not just to respect my military service, but to understand that respect and love aren't competing forces. They're complementary aspects of healthy relationships, and when combined, they create bonds that can withstand any challenge. The young woman who had stood alone in her dress blues, feeling erased from her own brother's wedding, had been transformed by one man's courage to speak the truth. Sometimes the most important battles aren't fought on foreign soil. They're fought in ballrooms and family gatherings, where the weapons are words and the victory is measured in understanding, respect, and love. And sometimes, the recognition you need most comes not from the people you expect, but from someone who simply sees your worth and has the courage to say so out loud. But Jake's impact on my life extended far beyond that single evening. Over the following years, he became more than just David's best friend. He became someone I could count on for perspective, encouragement, and unwavering support. We maintained a correspondence that started with occasional emails about family events, but evolved into deep conversations about leadership, service, and the challenges of maintaining personal relationships while pursuing demanding careers. When I was deployed to Eastern Europe for a 6-month NATO training mission, Jake organized care packages from David's wedding guests, people who remembered me not as the excluded sister, but as the honored colonel. Robert Chen, Sarah's grandfather, sent handwritten letters sharing stories from his own military service. Dr. Chen included medical journals and books, acknowledging my interest in military medicine. Even Linda, Sarah's mother, contributed homemade cookies and photographs from family gatherings I'd missed. The most profound change, however, was in my relationship with my mother. 3 months after the wedding, she enrolled in a community college course called Understanding Military Families. She wanted to learn about the challenges faced by military personnel and their loved ones, to better comprehend the sacrifices she'd taken for granted for so many years. "I never realized how much I didn't know," she told me during one of our weekly phone calls. "The instructor is a retired Army wife, and she's been helping me understand that your absences weren't choices. They were duties. There's a difference between choosing to be away and being called to serve." Her education culminated in her joining a local support group for military families, where she became an advocate for better understanding between civilian and military communities. She even started volunteering at the VA hospital, using her nursing background to help veterans transition back to civilian life. "I'm trying to honor your service by serving others," she explained. "I can't change the past, but I can make sure other military families feel the support and appreciation they deserve." David and Sarah's baby, my goddaughter Emma, became another bridge between my military life and my family relationships. When she was old enough to understand, I would video call from various bases around the world, showing her different countries and cultures. She grew up thinking it was perfectly normal for her godmother to wear camouflage and work in places with names she couldn't pronounce. "Aunt Becca fights bad guys," she would tell anyone who listened, her 4-year-old understanding of military service both simple and profound. The ripple effects of that wedding night continued to spread in unexpected ways. Jake began volunteering with a nonprofit organization that provided career counseling to veterans transitioning to civilian life. He used his financial expertise to help former military personnel navigate the complex world of civilian employment, translating their military experience into language that civilian employers could understand and appreciate. That night at David's wedding taught me something important, he told me during one of our conversations. Respect isn't just about acknowledging someone's achievements. It's about understanding the sacrifice behind those achievements and honoring the person who made them. 5 years after the wedding, when Emma was starting kindergarten, she came home with an assignment to interview a family member about their job. Without hesitation, she chose me. Her teacher later called Sarah to say it was the most compelling presentation the class had ever heard. Emma stood up in front of 25 children and explained that her godmother was a general who protected families like theirs. Sarah told me, her voice filled with pride. She talked about how you missed holidays to keep other families safe, and how that made you a hero. By the end of her presentation, half the class wanted to join the army. That phone call reminded me why Jake's gesture had been so important. It wasn't just about recognizing my service, it was about helping others understand the value and meaning of that service. Emma's presentation reached beyond her classroom, inspiring other military families in the school district and creating conversations about service and sacrifice that might never have happened otherwise. As I advanced through the ranks, eventually achieving the rare distinction of becoming a 3-star general, I carried with me the lessons learned from that transformative evening. I made it a priority to recognize and honor the service of the soldiers under my command, understanding that acknowledgement and respect could be as powerful as any weapon in our arsenal. I also made sure that every family event, every promotion ceremony, every significant moment in my military career included the people who had learned to see my service as a source of pride rather than inconvenience. Jake attended my promotion to 2-star general, bringing with him a framed photograph of the original salute that had changed everything. My mother pinned on my 3rd star, her hands steady and proud as she performed a duty she finally understood the significance of. The story came full circle when Emma, now 16 and considering her own future, asked me to help her with a school essay about heroism. As we worked together on her paper, she asked me a question that took me back to that night in the ballroom. "Aunt Becca, do you think Uncle Jake knew how important that salute would be when he did it?" I thought about her question carefully, remembering the conviction in Jake's voice, the precision of his gesture, and the courage it had taken to speak truth in a room full of people who might not have wanted to hear it. "I think he knew it was the right thing to do," I told her. "Sometimes that's all the knowledge we need. The understanding that someone deserves recognition and respect, and the courage to provide it even when others have failed to do so." Emma's essay won 1st place in the state competition, and when she read it aloud at the award ceremony, I saw the same recognition in the audience's eyes that I had witnessed at David's wedding. The power of one person's courage to speak truth and show respect continues to ripple outward, creating waves of understanding that touch lives in ways we may never fully comprehend. Today, as I prepare for retirement after 30 years of military service, I keep that framed photograph on my desk, not as a reminder of a moment of personal vindication, but as a symbol of the transformative power of recognition, respect, and love. Jake's salute taught my family to see my service differently, but it taught me something even more important, that the courage to honor others, even when it's unexpected or uncomfortable, is one of the greatest gifts we can give. The young woman who felt erased from her brother's wedding became a general who never forgot the importance of seeing and honoring the service of others. And it all began with one man's decision to stand up, raise his glass, and say the words that needed to be said: "Welcome, Field Marshal." Sometimes the most important rank you can achieve isn't the one pinned to your uniform. It's the one that lives in the hearts of people who truly see your worth. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.